Why does it have to go online?
But we're online now, Carolyn. We're going for it, and right, here we are. Right, good morning to you all, and we're on 2 Samuel chapter 18, and we're going to go down to verse 18. I think will be the first section of that. I don't know if anyone would like to read and anyone like to pray. Any volunteers for either?
I'll do either.
Okay.
I pray. I haven't got my lens in to read.
Okay, that's fine. Go for it, Carolyn, and then we'll get David to read. That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for your word, Lord. Thank you for this group, and thank you for the equipment to put everything online as well. And we thank you for this opportunity to study more of your word, and just ask you to bless this time in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks,
Amen.
Carolyn.
Okay. 2 Samuel chapter 18 and
Yeah.
1 through till
18.
to 18. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Right. And David numbered the people who were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. Then David sent 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, and the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of Ittai, the Gittite. And the king said to the people, I also will surely go out with you myself. But the people answered, you shall not go out, for if we flee away, they will not care about us, nor if half of us die, will they care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us now. For you are now more help to us in the city. Then the king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and by thousands. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all captains orders concerning Absalom. So the people went out into the field of battle against Israel, and the battle was in the woods of Ephraim. The people of Israel were overthrown there before the servants of David. And a great slaughter of 20,000 took place there that day. For the battle there was scattered over the face of the whole countryside, and the woods devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. Then Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule. The mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth. So he was left hanging there between heaven and earth, and the mule which was under him went on. Now a certain man saw it and told Joab and said, I just saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree. So Joab said to the man who told him, you just saw him, and why did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, though I were to receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing, the king's commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware lest anyone touch the young man but Absalom. Otherwise, I would have dealt falsely against my own life. For there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. Then Joab said, I cannot linger with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through the Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. So Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel. For Joab held back the people, and they took Absalom and cast him into a large pit in the woods and laid a very large heap of stones over him. Then all Israel fled, everyone to his tent. Now Absalom, in his lifetime, had taken and set up a pillar for himself, which is the king in the king's valley. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument.
Thanks, David. So here we find the civil war that is running against David in the nation. David's run for his life, but obviously David has stopped in a city. He's regrouped. He's got his troops together. He's put them in 3 divisions under 3 different commanders, and that way they can be more mobile and they can do lots of different attacks and raids, and things are far more manageable. And he's obviously planned this. He's got a strategy. He's a very experienced commander, battle leader by this point. And it says the forest took more people than the armies did, and that's one of the things in one of the battles there. And basically, I think it's that kind of the way the barbarians took down the Romans. The Romans built these lovely roads up and down the country so they could get places very fast, but they were rank and file. They were in order, and very often ambush raids from forests were a very good way of attacking rank and file. So Absalom's army could be taken down by raid, by ambush, and by things like that, and therefore the forest is almost like another weapon in the system. So that's my assumption of what that passage means, that bit where it says about the forest. I think going through it, we see the arrogance of Absalom. We see how very similar to Saul, destiny, kind of what follows him, his afterwards are things that matter to Absalom. He's a very proud man. He's got a lot of these things. His hair that he's boasted about so much and known for actually is part of his downfall. It gets caught up in a tree. This tangled mess of hair on his head gets tangled up in a tree, and he's left hanging. And we see what's going on there. I'll just mute you there a moment there, Mandy. And basically, we see this direct disobeying of the king's order. And we know from what we've studied before that Joab had all his field set on fire by Absalom, and Absalom hadn't chosen him to lead the army. But what we find is that Joab was somewhere in Jerusalem earlier when Absalom took power, but now he's back with David, commanding David's armies, and one of the sections that David sets apart. And so there's a lot going on here. It's a sad end of Absalom, but Joab doesn't seem to mind killing off people who, in an innocent fashion. He's got a history of this right back to when he took out Saul's general. And so there's a lot of things going on here. So I think I'll throw it open and see who'd like to chip into this. It's interesting that the king's kind of the royal family and so on rode mules into battle. They're famously not very very stubborn animals and so on, but mules were the thing that was ridden. So I think that's quite interesting. But this mule's left him hanging from his hair. David?
Yeah, just a quick one. I was quite amazed that David said that I'll go and do battle with you, and I'll go out with you guys. And then they turned around and said, no, you stay here. And David has a humility there where he actually says, okay, whatever seems best to you, I will do. I don't think it's because he was scared. I think it's because he was humble and took advice from his people. And I think it's a good. Mandy was talking yesterday about leadership things, Mandy, and it is. Oh no, it wasn't. No, it's the day before, and it was. Who was that? It was
Friday.
Friday,
Yeah.
we were talking about leadership. I think to be leadership should be open to being to having advice.
Yeah.
It's not about being proud. So you do what I tell you and don't question it. It's hearing, because you've got all those people with you, and I think first of all, David listens to God, but then he also listens to his people as well.
And I think that listening leadership is wise leadership. I think that's absolutely right.
Joab, by the way, I think Joab is Dave. I seem to remember Joab's David's nephew, isn't he?
I think there's some relationship. Yeah.
I seem to remember from previous studies. It's a family feud, really.
Yeah, but I think also there's a lot of pride in position and things like that. I think Joab had been with David the whole way through.
Fairly ruthless, isn't he?
Oh, he is, yeah. But David will deal with him later. But this comes clear. And I think that's another thing. David's willing to leave things sitting in place sometimes until the right time to deal with them. So there's other things here as well we can learn from this. But this is David on the run, and David on the run is a scary thing. I mean, his strategy here, he's got thousands and thousands of people with him. I mean, they must have just heard he was there and headed for there. I think in a time of civil war, it's very hard to know who's with you, who's not. And he's lost his advisor, actually turned against him. But the bad advice that Absalom took has meant that it's a huge battle now. Whereas if he'd listened to the advice of Ahithophel, he'd have gone early on and probably finished David off. This advice that he didn't listen to has led to a huge scale of something, and also played into David's strengths. Any other comments on this, or shall we move on a little bit?
Did Joab used to be against David?
No, Joab was with David, I think, all along. He turned against Saul's general, who David was going to make general, and actually, as a result of that, he became general of David's army. So he was a significant figure in all of this, but a warrior and a very ruthless one. Yeah.
I think he was implicated in Uriah's death as well, wasn't he, Joab?
Oh, he oversaw that. Yeah. For David, it's still on David. The blood's on David's hands, but But Joab administered what David told him to. On the rug. Right, let's move on to the next bit. So this is where David hears about Absalom. But I just say one final thing before we go there. So it's 19 to 30 is the next section I've got in my Bible here. But just the signal of pride in Absalom, and the statement that we have, pride goes before a fall. It's almost the image of the pride, part of what he presented as his image with his hair, becomes his undoing. And I think that happens so often. Our pride can so easily become our undoing, and that is very often the case. It's almost poetic in a way, not in a nice way, but in a way, just a way it comes full circle there. But shall I read the next bit?
Yeah.
Right, so I'll read from 19. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, "Let me run and carry the news to the king, that the Lord has delivered him from the hand of the enemies." And Joab said to him, "You are not to carry news today. You may carry news another day, but today you will carry no news, because the king's son is dead." Then Joab said to the Cushite, "Go and tell the king what you have seen." The Cushite bowed before Joab and ran. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said again to Joab, "Why, come what may, let me also run after the Cushite." And Joab said, "Why will you run, my son, seeing you will have no reward for the news?" "Come what may," he said, "I will run." So he said to him, "Run." And Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain and outran the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up on the roof of the gate by the wall. And when he lifted his head, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out and told the king. The king said, "If he is alone, there is news in his mouth." As he drew nearer and nearer, the watchman saw another man running. And the watchman called to the gate and said, "See, another man running alone." The king said, "He also brings news." The watchman said, "I think the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok." And the king said, "He's a good man and comes with good news." Then Ahimaaz cried to the king, "All is well." And he bowed before the king with his face to the earth and said, "Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against the Lord the king." The king said, Is it well with the young man Absalom?" Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent the king's servant, your servant saw a great commotion, but I don't know what it was." And the king said, "Turn aside and stand here." So he turned aside and stood still. I'll go on to the next bit as well. And behold, the Cushite came. And the Cushite said, "Good news for the king, for the Lord has delivered you this day from the hand of all who rose against you." The king said to the Cushite, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" And the Cushite answered, "May the enemies of my lord and all who rise against you for evil be like that young man." And the king was deeply moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And when he went, he said, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I have died instead of you? O Absalom, my son, my son." So a very broken scene here for David as he hears the news, but an interesting tale of two runners. Obviously, Ahimaaz wanted to break the good news. He wanted to bring the good news, and actually he decided not to bring all the news, but he let the Cushite bring the other piece of news. And actually, this arriving of two pieces of news very, very quickly, one after the other, is obviously how communication was done in the day. You sent a reliable runner, and I think this, this is very interesting. Ahimaaz was appointed by David to help bring news from Jerusalem to him. And so he sees himself as a king's messenger, and he should deliver messages. I think there's something of pride there. There's something of status. There's something of honor, and there's something of servanthood as well. I think all expressed there. But I'll open it up. Any comments anyone's got?
Will David punish Joab?
Eventually.
We'll have to wait and see.
We'll have to wait and see. The story unfolds. We don't want to rush too far ahead, but Joab will be dealt with for what he's done.
It's interesting, isn't it, that actually when the news of was it the news of Saul got to David? David actually killed the people who brought the news, and so there's a bit of a danger of bringing news of his son's death, and maybe Joab was protecting Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok the priest. I presume it's Zadok the priest.
Yeah.
And not allowing him to go forward and putting this poor little Cushite in front of him.
Yeah.
It might be that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is risk management by Joab.
Yeah.
And I think what he's thinking is, we don't know how the king will react. And he's been with the king all the time, so he knows how David reacts to stuff. So he's a little bit nervous, thinking, right, how do we deal with this? I don't want to risk my best runner. We'll send the Cushite, who we don't even bother naming.
Who is a Cushite?
It's a tribe of Cush.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's from another group of people, and so he sends this guy from a foreign background to run with all the risky news. But whereas Ahimaaz, he's wise as well as a messenger. And chatting to folks who do long distance running, like Jed, who's in our church, that kind of running, people do a lot of thinking. There's a lot of strategizing that goes on. There's a lot of preparing for a race and thinking things through, and how far are you going to run at a certain pace, and how far are you going to increase that pace, and what's your strategy, how much energy you're going to have left at the end of the race. There's all that kind of thinking, and obviously that's all here in the Old Testament. He's planned his route, he's thought about it, he manages to take the guy. There's all that kind of thinking that's around in modern sports today, and actually, I think while he's running, he's thinking, well, if there's another guy running, if I beat him, I can bring the good news, and I can let him bring the rest of the news, and actually, that's his purpose. He wants to bring good news to the king. He's served the king the whole way through this rebellion. He's run messages back and forth. He's risked his life for that, and he wants to be the guy delivering the news that this rebellion's over and squashed. And I think he wants to take that. That's what he wants to do. And I think very often you see that kind of ambition in people in workplaces. I want to get to this. I want to push through to this point. It's an interesting way of working. Sorry, Carolyn, go on.
No, I'm just thinking, isn't it obvious, if the rebellion's over, isn't it obvious that Absalom is dead? I mean, to say that it's over, it means that Absalom's stepped down, or he's died,
or he's given up.
Yeah.
So if Absalom had been captured, and they had him, then the rebellion's over. As far as that goes, it's now down to the king to deal with Absalom. And I think I don't know what the king could have done with Absalom. So he was a dangerous chap. And so in this, for David, it works out well by the death of Absalom, but I don't think that's what David would have chosen. And I think that's that's all part of this. But I think for David, there's this sadness. He's lost his son. This hasn't gone well. And so
it's all an outcome of the Bathsheba event, isn't it?
It is. And I wonder how a nation repairs after this, because it's been about kings fighting it out in a way, or not kings, but a prince and a king fighting it out, and one side has won. Now, what happens to all the people who supported Absalom? There were thousands and thousands and thousands of them. What should happen to them? What happens to the people who've given advice? What happens to people who said, "Oh, great, Absalom, thank you. We think you're wonderful. We want you as our king." And then David's back in power. What happens to those people? What happens to Mephibosheth and all those people as well? So there's a whole load of things playing out here. Mephibosheth's land has been halved between him and the servant. servant made a swift move. Everyone is making a land grab in the turmoil of it all. Now all of that's got to be settled out. All of that's got to be sorted. The kingdom's not as strong as it was. So even though the battle's been won, even though David's back in post, it never has been as strong since he sinned with Bathsheba. There's cracks in it. There's the consequences of that sin that run through the system. So I don't know what we learn from this. Are there any things that you feel we can learn for our lives today as a result of this passage?
No, don't think so.
I think recognizing that your actions have repercussions.
Yeah.
You know, and I know today we're forgiven and there's no condemnation, but our actions do have subsequent things happening as a result of them.
Yeah.
So it's being careful of being alongside God in what we do. But I mean, there are people that we relate to as well who perhaps don't do what I mean. But I mean, this one with Amnon and Tamar, of course, was something that was not David's direct doing, but it was a result of what David had done. It sort of reduced the sense of what was right and wrong, I think. So
yeah,
it's I think that's my take on it all.
Yeah. It was David's inactivity, injustice, that led to this more Absalom situation building. It was David's action with Bathsheba that caused this outworkings, and this. So there's it's like the dominoes are tumbling, and you know the reaction to what he's done wrong and the consequences of it. And this is it. There's consequences to our actions.
That's right.
And we need to be aware of. And I think sometimes we can go, oh, okay, I've got myself right with God. Great, that's what you need to do. You desperately need that to move forward. But actually, and that's the right way to be when you've made a mistake. But actually to also recognize there may be some outworkings of your mistake as well. And so, you know, it's, you know, very, very often you find, you know, in this situation, well, God's forgiven me, so therefore, you know, actually, it's not always as smooth as that. When there are still things that follow some of those things, actions and reactions and so on. So I'm going to read. Let's go for the next bit. I recognise David has to leave a little bit early, but I think we'll just keep working through the narrative of the story. So chapter 19 we're on, and we'll go as far as verse 8, and then we'll go on probably after that as well. So would someone like to read?
Yeah, I'll do.
Okay, thanks, David. Go for it.
I'm on my telephone at the moment, so I can't see who else is on. So.
There's Jenny and Mandy, but I think listening to the voices behind Mandy, I think she's unable to speak very much. And Carolyn hasn't got her glasses, so yeah, there's always contacts. Yeah, right, go for it.
Okay, right, 19. And Joab was told, "Behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard it and said that day, "The king is grieved for his son." And the people stole back into the city that day, as people who are ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, "Today you have disgraced all your servants, who today have saved your life, the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines, in that you love your enemies and hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants. For today, sorry, start that again. For you regard neither princes nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then it would have pleased you well. Now, therefore, arise, go out and speak comfort to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, not one will stay with you for this night. And that will be worse for you than all the evil that has befallen you from your youth until now. Then the king arose and sat in the gate, and they told all the people, saying, there is the king sitting in the gate. So all the people came before the king, for everyone in Israel had fled to his tent.
Okay, so I think this is an interesting bit here of advice from Job. It's sort of like I remember hearing about soldiers in the Vietnam War when they arrived back in America, because there was such an anti-war protest going on there, that there was no receiving of the troops in any positive manner, which caused a lot of problems for those soldiers returning. And here we find an example of that. With the loss of Absalom, the focus for David is all about Absalom. And he's gutted. He's really upset. And that there's no well done, guys, for sticking up for the king. No, none of that going on. They're slinking back in like people who flee from battle, it says. You know, the kind of people who run away from battle, kind of like, oh, I ran away, but I'll try and sneak back home. And I think that's very sad in some ways. But the advice of Job here, he's way past all this stuff. He's the guy who finished Absalom off. You know, for him, he's thinking, yay, well done. Wow, why isn't everyone celebrating with me? You know, we did him. I'll put 3 spears in him myself. You know, he's a bit like that. And so he is blind to the issues of heart which David has. And David has sorrow in his heart about his son. He's got sorrow in his heart because he's behind. He knows why this has happened. It's partly his actions behind it that have caused this. And so I think there is a need for him to sit at the gate, and so he goes and sits at the gate. Yeah, go for it, David.
Yeah, it's just there's a sort of parallel going on here to present day. I think it's the conflict between the role of the king and the role of the king as father, and in the beginning, David leaves Jerusalem with 600 men, but then suddenly at the beginning of chapter 18, we find he's got thousands of people that he has to oversee. So there's a lot of people in his who are loyal to him as king, and I think when we come to this point here, David has this dilemma of his position as father of Absalom that he's obviously aching for, but his position as king of the nation, which he has to overcome his personal feelings in order to actually administer the role of king, and you know, it must be very similar to the situation today that we see, where there is a conflict between, for dare I say, the king as a father and the king as somebody who fulfills the role of the royalty in our constitution, and it must be very, very difficult for him. I mean, no matter how bad your son behaves, you will always love them, and to see what's actually going on at the moment must be heartbreaking for him. But he still has to fulfil the role of the royalty, and you've got an exact copy here with David. He's got a pain in his heart for Absalom, but he's also got to fulfill the role that God's placed him in. And I think for us, bringing it down, when we're not all kings, but we all have roles and purposes that God's given us, and that has to come first before before anything else, before self even. And to get to that point is a road. We're sort of learning all along the road. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think it's much better to read the whole lot and then come back, because you get the context and see these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Jenny?
Yeah, I think it shows God's heart, because David had a heart after God, and God must, the Lord must actually weep over those who just won't turn to him, and they go to a lost eternity, but he still loves them. And it's the same thing, isn't it? And obviously God does everything perfectly and David didn't, but it shows his heart that he loved his son, but he obviously had to do the right thing. And very difficult, isn't it? If your child turns against you, it's very hard, but you still love them no matter what, don't you? So like they said, so
and I think there's a few things here that is in my head. As a family, we watched a box set together of O.J. Simpson's trial, which was very interesting, redone with John Travolta as one of the lawyers and so on, and the guy who plays Ross and Friends as a Kardashian and so on. But in that, you've got this torment of family and role and different things going on played out. You've got the emptiness of OJ's victory and how restaurants won't even open their restaurant for him, and some of those things going on when he gets away with what he got away with. But in this, you sort of think exactly like you're saying there, Jenny. There's this sadness of heart along with other things. It's a really difficult mix. He's lost his son. His son's died, before him. And actually, that's not the order of things. And as a dad, he's gutted. And as David's saying, he's got the father role. He's also got the public role, national role. And I think it must be so hard on prime ministers' families. It must be so hard on presidents' families around the world, where they've got to follow through with things that will mean major catastrophe and loss of life if they don't do something. But at the same time, there's the cost in the family as well. And I think some of that power, some of those positions are very expensive in terms of family. You very often find that, in many settings. You're off, David, are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
See you later.
God bless. Have a good day.
Bye.
I'm thinking about the royal family now too. It's in a similar situation, aren't they? It's so hard for them.
Yeah.
So hard for them. We need to really for them.
Yeah, and I think one of the difficulties in that's been brought is, if you look at what's going on in one way, saying, well, this is how I should be treated as part of a family, but ignoring the whole royal element of that, it can sound horrendous from that point of view. When you add in the other bit, it means you've got a family that kind of by inheritance, by succession, are inheriting a role that means that they can't be a normal family. And I think there's those two things, and that's probably why it's playing out in America, because there's less understanding of the royal role there, and so on. Sorry, go on, Jenny.
No, so they don't understand it in America, do they?
I mean, and I think I think it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing for a family to carry. And yes, we do need to pray for them. God Save the King is our national anthem, and needs to be our national practice as well. So looking at this, I think I haven't got much more to add on this, except to move it on the next bit, because it is quite a rolling bit of things. The king sat at the gate and people came to him and said, "Oh, great to have you back as king." There's that connection with people, and Job's given him good advice, good political advice here, but at the same time he's gutted about losing his son, and even though his son was trying to kill him, It's just like, and I think you've got it right there, Jenny. There's the same kind of thing. God's love for the lost is huge. So shall I read on the next bit? I'll do from 16, and I think we'll go down as far as the end, which is a fair bit of reading, but I'll go for it anyway. But David pardons his enemies. So this is the aftermath of a civil war. This is how David brings some of that peace into place, and so we'll just go with that for the next bit. And then Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite, went down from Bahurim, hurried down with the men from Judah to meet King David. And with him were 1,000 men from Benjamin. And Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, with 15 sons and his 20 servants, rushed down to the Jordan before the king. And they crossed the ford to bring the king's household and to do his pleasure. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan, and said to the king, Let not my lord be guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord left Jerusalem. Do not let the king take it to heart, for your servant knows I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I come this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come and meet my lord the king. And Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said, Shall not Shimei be put to death because he cursed the Lord's anointed? Now, let me just remind everyone of that. Shimei was the guy who cursed David as he ran from Jerusalem. So this is what he's saying. Should he not be cursed, put to death because he cursed the Lord's anointed? But David said, What have I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah, that you should this day be as an adversary to me? Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? For do I not know that I am this day king over Israel? And the king said to Shimei, You shall not die. And the king gave his oath. And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king. He had neither taken care of his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he came back safely. When he came to Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? And he answered, My lord the king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will go and saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride it and go with the king. For your servant is lame. He has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like an angel of God. Do therefore what seems good to you. For all my father's house were but men doomed to death before my lord the king. But you set your servant among those who eat at the table. What further right have I to cry to the king? And the king said to him, Why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided that you and Ziba shall divide the land. And Mephibosheth said to the king, Oh, let him take it all, since the Lord my king has come safely home. Now Barzillai, the Gileadite, had come down from Rogelim, and he went with the king to the Jordan and escorted him over the Jordan. Now Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old. He had provided the king with food while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. And the king said to Barzillai, Come over with me, and I will provide for you with me in Jerusalem. But Barzillai said to the king, How many years have I still to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am this day 80 years old. Can I discern what is pleasant and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats or what he drinks? I still listen to the voices of singing men and singing women. Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go with a little way over the Jordan with my king. Why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant return, that I may die in my own city, near the grave of my father and mother. But here is your servant Chimham. Let him go with my lord the king, and do for him whatever seems good to you. And the king answered Chimham, answered, Chimham shall go over with me, and I will do for him what seems good to you, and all your desires of me I will do for you. Then all the people went over to the Jordan, and the king went over, and the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own home. The king went to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him, and all the people of Judah and half the people of Israel brought the king on his way. Then the king of Israel, all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, Why have our brothers, the men of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king and his household over the Jordan, and all David's men with him? All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, Because the king is our close relative. Why then are you angry over this matter? Have we eaten at all at the king's expense, or has he given us any gift? And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, We have 10 shares in the king, and in David also we have more than you. Why then did you despise us? Were we not the first to speak of bringing back our king? But the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. And so what we find here is David very graciously forgiving his enemies, and there's a lot in that. So Shimei is this one that cursed him and threw rocks and threw dust in the air and cursed David the whole way as he went along, followed him along a ridge, throwing stones at him and all this. And someone said, Shall I go and just chop his head off? And David said, No, let him do this. Maybe God will hear us, But David's men were bowed down under this oppression from Shimei, and all of them were very angry at Shimei. But David here goes, Look, no problem. And Shimei comes and just says, Look, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. And David's very forgiving here. Any king would have probably lobbed his head off in other settings, but David's heart is a different matter. Also, this messy thing with Mephibosheth, where he's been told that Mephibosheth was hoping to get a position with Absalom, which was false, and the servant had tried to take the land, and he'd given him the land. He then said, No, we're going to split the land, and that's where it goes. But there's some of these things where he's also rewarding. So he's forgiving enemies. He's forgiving people who stood on the wrong side of this. But at the same time, he's also rewarding and blessing some of those who helped provide for him during that time as well. So it's kind of like bringing a unity. But what the passage is showing is there wasn't a full unity. There's a bit of vying for the king's attention between Judah and Israel. So some of the old cracks in Israel are beginning to open, in the nation of Israel are beginning to open up along tribal grounds between Judah and Israel. And David was king over Judah first, and then king over the whole thing. But some of those old cracks have opened up in this, and I think that's what's been hinted at here. So I don't know if anyone's got anything to chip into this.
I find it too many. I can't take it all in.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, first bit is he's forgiving all his enemies, he's rewarding those that have done well, and that's what he's doing at the city gates, as it were. And I think that kind of forgiveness, those kind of things are very, very important for the nation.
Yeah.
They see the kings forgiving people who say sorry. Right, that's important. These folks are risking their lives by going to the king, because the last time he saw the king, he was throwing rocks at him. This time he's turning up to the king and, I'm here, deal with me as you like. But that forgiveness is a very powerful dynamic and holds things together. Also, the reward and blessing for folks is important as well. And it's saying that all of Judah turned out, but half of Israel. Israel was bigger than Judah. Israel had 10 tribes. Judah only had 2. And so there's this kind of like rivalry there for the favoritism of the king and all those kind of things that David had worked so hard early on to do away with. Now those cracks are back, and I think,
against,
yeah. Sorry,
was it
go on.
Judah against Israel then, or was it?
Years ago, so in this, when David first came into power, after Saul and Jonathan died, the tribes of Judah said, we want David as our king. The tribes of Israel said, actually, we want Saul's son, offspring, to be our king. And so you had the two different groups, and they were at war with each other, right? And then someone assassinated the king of Israel, and as a result, they all became under David. And so what's happened now is, with David's sin with Bathsheba, the cracks have opened up in his own family, and now the cracks are opening up in the nation further. There's been a civil war. They've got through that. The king's brought some unity back, but there's still the hairline cracks through everything that could open up. And that's a hint in the scripture to say where it's going. Yeah.
Right.
So I think there's a lot there. I think the forgiveness for enemies, that forgiving attitude, is a very powerful dynamic. It can bring healing into a broken nation like this, and it can bring healing into broken lives as well, and broken situations. Sometimes that forgiveness, that's unmerited, undeserved, but freely given, is a very powerful thing. It sets us free. And here we see it setting a nation free from disaster. The king sitting at the gate, as Joab advised, very important to be seen, to be connecting with the people. But David's bit, the forgiveness of enemies and some of those things, actually take the war out of the country. If he'd punished all his enemies, there would be like a huge amount of bloodshed over Israel. He's not interested in that. That would be the more powerful position to hold in some ways, politically. That's what kings did in civil wars. But David doesn't take that action. He's full of forgiveness, full of grace, and actually pulls the whole thing together because he's a good shepherd. He cares for the sheep. He's not about slicing and dicing the sheep so he can hold a better position as shepherd or manage things better. It's not about him. It's about the nation, and he acts for the nation here. And I think that's a very powerful dynamic. Yeah. Right. Well, thank you all for your comments. I think there's a lot in this, but it's a lot of narrative to get through to get some of the juicy bits out for our own lives. But I think it's certainly sad watching the falling apart of what David's built. But we have good days ahead because we have things like Solomon coming up. Not fully in this book as clear, but actually the passage that Mandy raised on Sunday, from Second Chronicles 7:14, if I remember from memory, about if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will turn and hear from heaven and heal their land. And that's powerful promises. There's the presence of God filling the temple that Solomon builds, that was such a force that the priests couldn't stand up because the presence of God was so strong. God hasn't left the scene. God's very much there, and we're going to find that all out later on. But at the moment, we're working through the book of 2 Samuel, and at the moment, it seems to just be all about the results of David's sin, and they don't just rumble on and on. And that's what sin does. It complicates, it messes up lives, it causes problems, and that's why we have Jesus, who died to pay the price for all sin, to turn things around. And we need to bring that restoration into things around us. But thank you all. I think we'll leave it there. and move offline. But thanks all for your comments and participation, and David, who's had to disappear. But thank you, and God bless.